Thank you, Commissioners. This isn't a debate, but I have had a debate with the former president of the New Jersey Dental Association. I'd like to share with you a copy of that. It's 46 minutes long. One other thing I would like to draw attention to before I start, in Dr. Cornwell's paper, he makes a very, very serious allegation, mistake, and I would like him to correct it before the meeting ends. On page 18, he says, allegations of fraud were later made against Bassin, that's Elise Bassin from Harvard. I would like him either to substantiate those claims, show where those claims are made, because I do not believe anybody has made that charge. They have made charges against her thesis director, Professor Chester Douglas, and you might be confusing that. I spent the last 19 years researching this issue, first as a professor of chemistry specializing in environmental chemistry and toxicology, now as director of the Fluoride Action Network. This research effort culminated in the publication of this book with two other scientists, James Beck and Spedding Micklem. All three of us are retired, had plenty of time to read the literature. Every single argument we made in this book is backed up with references to the literature, 80-odd pages in all. And the shocking thing is, although we hoped this would raise the level of debate, there's been no scientific response to these facts. If the other side had produced a book like that, we would have had a response out in a few weeks. A note on endorsements. Proponents use a long list of endorsements from government agencies and professional bodies, claiming that fluoridation is safe and effective, safe and effective. They repeat that ad nauseum. But these endorsements date back to the 1950s, when there were practically no science on the table, either for effectiveness or for safety. So all they represent today, when they're used, is how difficult it is for bureaucracies to change their minds once they've adopted something as policy. When policy is king, science becomes a slave. In short, for many dental bodies, fluoridation has become a belief system which is extremely resistant to new scientific evidence. Dentists at dental school only hear one side of the story, and after they've graduated, they're so busy with their practices, they seldom have time to read the literature to any extent, certainly not on health effects. Notice also that these endorsements have not impressed the vast majority of countries worldwide that do not fluoridate their water, including 97% of Europe. And beware of reviews done by pro-fluoridation governments. They are predictable because they select panels of experts who are known to be pro-fluoridation to begin with. Here are some examples. The Irish Fluoridation Forum, the Australian NHMRC review, the Health Canada review. In fact, in that last one, the Health Canada review, they selected 6 experts to review the literature, and 4 of them were known to be pro-fluoridation dentists. Now, in my presentation, I will go through the following. Mother's milk protects babies from fluoride. Water fluoridation removes that protection. US children are being grossly overexposed to fluoride. Fluoride is neurotoxic. The last children that need their IQ lowered are children from low-income families, precisely the children that are targeted for this practice. The evidence that swallowing fluoride lowers tooth decay is extremely weak. The mechanism is predominantly topical, not systemic. There are better ways of fighting tooth decay in low-income families, especially in Scotland with the Child Smile program. Now, I don't know how far I'm going to get with all of those, but let's start with this. Mother's milk, the level of fluoride is 0.004 parts per million, remarkably little. If you believe in fluoridation, then you believe that all the women on this planet are deficient in fluoride as far as their milk is concerned. When you fluoridate at 1 part per million, a baby where the formula is made up with fluoridated tap water is going to get 250 times more fluoride than nature intended. Dental fluorosis rates indicate that our children are being overexposed to fluoride. In 2010, the CDC confirmed that 41% of all American children aged 12 to 15 had dental fluorosis. not all of it in the very mild category. 28.5% very mild, but 8.6% in the mild category, in which 50% of the tooth surface is impacted, and 3.6% in either the moderate or severe category, in which 100% of the tooth enamel is impacted. It would be reckless to assume that when fluoride is damaging the baby's growing tooth cells, creating this condition, it is not damaging other developing tissues like the bone, brain, and the endocrine system. And that was the judgment made in 1945 when they started all this. It was reckless. It was reckless to assume that the only impact would be dental fluorosis, especially with practically no research to establish that. Unfortunately, those who promote fluoridation most aggressively, like the Oral Health Division of the CDC, are preoccupied with teeth. The Oral Health Division is 30 people. They're nearly all dentally trained. It's dentists talking about teeth. And they have very little professional training on other tissues in the body. The evidence that fluoride is neurotoxic is extremely strong. You can see all the data, all the papers, all the references. You can go there at our webpage, fluoridaction.net, look for issues/health/brain. Now, this came largely to people's attention in 2012 with the Harvard meta-analysis. They looked at 27 studies comparing the IQ of children in high fluoride villages versus low fluoride villages. This study was published in Environmental Health Prospectus, one of the leading environmental health journals in the country. They acknowledged that there were many weaknesses in these studies, but they also said the results were remarkably consistent. We had lowered IQ in 26 out of 27 studies, and the average lowering was 7 IQ points, which is substantial. Now, fluoridation proponents have argued that the concentrations in the high fluoride villages were not relevant to water fluoridation in the United States. We heard a little bit about that earlier. This is not true. Here are 20 of the studies from the meta-analysis for which the concentration in the water in the high fluoride village is given. Some didn't have it, and some, the source was coal. If you look at the average of all those results from 20 studies, it's 3.52 parts per million, which is lower than the so-called safe drinking water standard in the United States. And several of the studies were less than 3 parts per million. Here are 5 studies, 1.82, 2.9, 2.5, and 2.38. So you've got to really watch out for public relations on this. It's public relations. It's outrageous to say that these range up to 10 parts per million. A toxicologist, when you look at this data, you don't look at the highest level that causes harm. You look at the lowest level. But the Harvard review is only the tip of the iceberg as far as fluoride's neurotoxicity is concerned. We have over 100 animal studies which indicate that fluoride can enter the brain, damage the brain. We have 31 out of 33 animal studies which show that fluoride lowered the ability of animals to learn and remember from mazes. And we have other human studies beyond the IQ studies, which I don't have time to go into, but they're all on our webpage. And there are now 44 out of 51 studies have found an association between modest exposure to fluoride and lowered IQ. Most of them from China, but some from India, Mexico, and Iran. And I want to give you more details on just one of those studies. This is the study by Zhang. He compared the IQ of children in 2 villages. I've been to those villages. The low fluoride village had an average of 0.36 parts per million in the well water. The high fluoride village had an average of 2.5. He controlled for lead, he controlled for iodine, and in retrospectively, he's controlled for arsenic. He found a drop of 5 to 10 IQ points across the whole age range. And he found that lowering of IQ correlated with the levels of fluoride in the children's urine and in the children's plasma. And here you can see the IQ curves are shifted over. Now, what he did, what very few people have did, he subdivided the high fluoride village, the Wamaya, into 5 different groups of increasing fluoride concentration. And for those groups, he then looked at the IQ, and he saw that the IQ dropped as the concentration in the subgroups increased. And here it is presented graphically, and you can see that IQ is lowered somewhere between those 2 points there. somewhere between 0.75 and 1.5 parts per million. So to pretend that this is high values, which we can ignore in the United States, is absolutely poppycock. We should also note that in these Chinese studies, and Zhang in particular, those children weren't using fluoridated toothpaste. And those children were probably breastfed and not bottle-fed. So for this particular experiment, American children are getting more fluoride than those Chinese children. So again, you've got to beware of public relations. Now, Dr. William Hersey, who's a senior scientist at the US EPA, his speciality was health risk assessment. And he's taken these IQ studies and he's done a standard risk assessment. A standard risk assessment that he would have done at the EPA for all kinds of different chemicals. And he found that the predicted safe level of fluoride that you would need to protect all the children in the United States, remember that's what we got to do, not the average child, but all children need to be protected. You need margin of safety. And what he found is that our children, some children are already exceeding that safe level before they've even drunk a glass of water. They're getting it from toothpaste and so on. So we've got a very serious issue. There's no margin of safety to protect the brains of all our children exposed to fluoride from a combination of water fluoridation and other sources. And the very last children who need a loss of IQ points are children from low-income families. They've already got so many strikes against them. And this is just one more that shouldn't be imposed upon them. And I've got two questions for proponents. I hope they will address them, but please listen to see if they do. What primary studies, not rubber stamp government review, but what primary studies can you cite that allow you to confidently ignore all these studies on neurotoxicity, all the animal studies, all the human studies, all the learning and memory experiments? What is it that you have in your hands that you can say, I don't have to worry about all that. This can't possibly lower the IQ of our children. And there's all the evidence there if you need to look at it. And the second question is, how can you, with a straight face, go on a public platform and continue to claim that fluoridation is safe when there is no margin of safety to protect all our children from lowered IQ? Now, one of the researchers on the meta-analysis from Harvard was Dr. Philippe Grandjean, who's very well known for his work on mercury. He says, fluoride seems to fit in with lead, mercury, and other poisons that cause chemical brain drain. He's the author of the book, Only One Chance. Now, what an incredible standard we have here. For many years, US regulatory agencies have been aggressively reducing exposure to lead and exposure to mercury because of the neurotoxicity evidence. But at the same time, they are allowing the deliberate addition of this neurotoxic substance to the drinking water of over 200 million people and our children. What a double standard. A possible explanation. No one is in charge of this practice in the United States. No US federal agency accepts responsibility or legal liability for the safety of the fluoridation program. The FDA has never approved fluoride for ingestion, either as a tablet, as a drug, or in fluoridated water. Its position is that fluoride is an unapproved drug. The EPA does not regulate additives to water. The EPA only regulates contaminants. And if it did an honest job with that, it would be the end of fluoridation, as I've shown you with Bill Hersey's analysis. The CDC Oral Health Division promotes fluoridation, but does not accept responsibility for safety or even carefully monitoring safety studies. When they made that proclamation in 1999, that fluoridation is one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century, which is quoted ad nauseum all over the world by journalists, editors, doctors, and state officials, they were 6 years out of date on the health studies. In 1999, they referred to a review done in 1993. This is shocking. So when you hear the word CDC, it's not the 20,000 highly qualified people in Atlanta with specialities in all kinds of things. All the pronouncements on fluoridation come from people like Bill Bailey and William Mars, the head of the Oral Health Division. They come from the Oral Health Division, and their job is to promote fluoridation. And they're using millions of dollars of taxpayers' money to give us propaganda. Not science, but twisting, and, well, I won't go into more evidence of harm. You have the UK hyperthyroidism study. I'm sorry you didn't mention that. This was out earlier this year by Peckham and others. That obviously updates the NRC report that you were referring to from 2006, and the USA ADHD study, which again relates to brain studies. And there's a graph from that. And I just finish on this. Despite the growing evidence of harm, the evidence that swallowing fluoride lowers tooth decay is surprisingly weak. And that's just been confirmed in the last few weeks with the Cochrane review, the gold standard for meta-analysis of epidemiological studies pertaining to medicine. The evidence is extremely weak. And the reason for that is most likely that even the CDC admits that the predominant action of fluoride is topical, not systemic. You don't need to swallow it. So why should swallowing it reduce tooth decay? And why should we impose it on people when if you want fluoride, you can simply brush it on your teeth and spit it out? This way you avoid exposing the whole body to a toxic substance, and you don't have to force it on people that don't want it. Thank you. This is a graph that appeared in the famous statement that fluoridation is one of the top 10 public health achievements in the 20th century. The CDC maintained that tooth decay was coming down in the United States in the 60s to the 90s at that time, because at the same time the percentage of the American population drinking fluoridated water was going up. However, if you look at World Health Organization data, you'll find that tooth decay is coming down, yes, and from the 60s to the present in these fluoridated countries, but it was also coming down as steeply, if not more steeply, in these non-fluoridated countries. Now, as far as the argument you need both fluoridated toothpaste and water fluoridation to make a difference, why is it that these countries without fluoridated water are doing just as well as the countries with the fluoridated? These countries have fluoridated water and fluoridated toothpaste, and we're meant to believe you need both, and yet when you look at the data from around the world, the non-fluoridated countries, they're doing just as well. As far as the economics are concerned, that's the figure of $1 saves 61. Before that, the CDC was throwing around this $1 saves $38. I would refer you to a paper by Coe and Thiessen, published in 2014, that absolutely debunked that study. That the study ignored the costs of dental fluorosis and, of course, any other health effect. As expected, there was no response to the neurotoxicity, no confident statement from Dr. Bailey or any of the others. Here is the evidence that says we can ignore all those Chinese studies. Here's the evidence that we can ignore all those animal studies. What did we get? We got a reference to one study in New Zealand, which was described as a very good study. It was an awful study. It was an awful study. It's been debunked because there was practically no control. You had about 1,400 people living in the fluoridated community and less than 100. And also the kids were taking fluoridated supplements. So a lousy, lousy study. So, and then you refer to the CDC and their self-serving documentation behind this point 7. They looked at all the health effects. What did they do with the IQ studies, the meta-analysis from Harvard? They said, oh, the concentrations were high, ranging up to 10 parts per million. That is public relations. That is spinning, ranging up to 10 parts per million. 2 out of the 20 studies had a range which went up to 10 parts per million. As a toxicologist, again, you look for the lowest level that causes harm and not pervert the public's mind with the highest level that caused harm. The real problem of tooth decay is that 80% of dentists in this country will not treat children on Medicaid. So all these crocodile tears about how we do this for poor children, the people that could do something about poor kids on Medicaid are not doing it. And tooth decay is not caused by too little fluoride. Remember, it's not a nutrient, but too much sugar. And that's what you've been avoiding, the obvious. And when Scotland addressed the obvious, and when kids go to Scotland, the first thing that happens in primary school is they're taught to brush their teeth, they get a better diet, their parents are involved in the whole thing, they get an annual inspection, treatment if necessary. And the result is that 12-year-olds in less than 10 years have gone from 48% without dental caries to 73% without dental caries, and it slashed the cost of the program. So there's some obvious things that we can do. And by avoiding sugar and using topical treatments for fluoride, you not only fight tooth decay, but you fight obesity. So if you're wondering where the money would come for education, we need education, not fluoridation, not some magic chemical that we spray on something or swallow. We need education, education of parents for better diet, education for people to avoid all those sugary drinks, and education for dental hygiene. And dentists could play a big role in this education, and not continuing to propagandize. Now, in terms of the word large quantities, I hear that all the time. It's the dose, everything's poisonous with the high enough dose. Yes. That's why you need a margin of safety analysis. It's no good just saying, oh, the level of where the IQ was lowered in China was this X parts per million, and the level that we drink in Colorado is X parts per million. You need to calculate the dose that causes harm, and then you need to do a margin of safety analysis to find a safe dose to protect the whole population. You're very rare in any of the propaganda from the ADA or the CDC ever see the phrase margin of safety. Never. And that tells you a great deal.
Thank you, Dr. Connett.
I think it went very, very well. As expected, we had 3 dentists talking about teeth and emphasizing all the benefits of fluoridation, exaggerated, I would say, and no cogent response to the evidence of harm, especially the evidence that fluoride interferes with the brain, lowers IQ in children. I asked them, what primary studies give you the confidence to ignore this huge database? Over 100 animal studies, 31 animal studies which shows fluoride lowers learning ability, memorizing ability, 44 human studies which shows it lowers IQ. There was no response to that. There was no body of evidence. And yet, Dr. Bailey said, when we call upon our experts, they look at weight of evidence. Well, where is the weight of evidence? We got over 100 animal studies showing it causes harm. We got 44 IQ studies. Where are the studies on the other side? Maybe less than half a dozen? He quoted one from New Zealand, which was a bad study. Very unsatisfactory. The huge problem for bureaucracies is that you don't challenge policy. Your job as a bureaucrat is to determine what policy is and then promote that policy. And the moment you question that policy, you're suspect. You have to worry about getting promotion, your pension, and everything else. And that's what we have. We have a chain of command from the Center of Disease Control Oral Health Division all the way down to the local doctors through the state health departments and the state dental directors, all obeying orders from the CDC. And the CDC, in turn, is working hand in hand with the American Dental Association, which also has a chain of command from the American Dental Association in Chicago to every state dental association. And it's not so much advancement in a bureaucracy with these organizations, it's peer pressure. It's peer pressure. If you look at what's happening in local dental societies, people that are opposed to fluoridation, they keep their mouths closed because of peer pressure. We have an example here of a dentist who doesn't use fluoride in their practice, and when citizens asked him to go public with this, he said, I can't. He's frightened of peer pressure. There's a huge problem on both fronts. First of all, many of the studies which are done on drugs are funded by the pharmaceutical industry, and there have been studies which shows that when the pharmaceutical industry studies a drug, it's quite different. The results are quite different from when the independent scientists do it. So you get what you pay for on the private level. And then on the government level, the big funder for research is the National Institute of Health, and on fluoridation, they are not funding many studies. They're not funding studies on arthritis, even though we know the first symptoms of fluoride's damage to the bone is just like arthritis. They're not financing studies on hypothyroidism, even though there's plenty of evidence that fluoride lowers thyroid function. And of course, we also had the IQ studies. There have been practically no studies on really important health issues because this is policy and they're not going to challenge policy. And another way that the NIH has influenced this is that Fluoride, the single journal in the world that's devoted entirely to fluoride research, geological research, chemical research, biological, biochemical, epidemiological, it's not listed in PubMed. So many people that search PubMed to find out all the studies don't get the primary organ that carries those studies. It's a massive betrayal of the public's trust. First of all, doctors should not stand by and see every day a violation of the individual's right to informed consent, which is happening every day. But they should be very concerned about the poor science which has underpinned this practice for 70 years. It's not healthy. And the end result is you're going to lose the public's trust. And I think that's the problem. I don't think that many people in public health really think that fluoridation is worth that much. It only amounts to a fraction of a tooth surface saved. So why are they spending so much money, so much taxpayers' money, continuing to promote this and argue for this? Why? And I think the answer is this. If they lose fluoridation, they lose the public's trust. They lose credibility. And when you lose credibility, then you're going to lose the trust of the public in other public health practices. And the moment you take that scab off, the moment you take fluoridation away, then you suddenly see a practice which is worth multi-billion dollars. And I'm talking about vaccination. And I don't speak as an opponent of vaccination. I'm just saying fluoridation in practical terms is not worth very much. But maybe they continue to keep this silly thing going because the real agenda is to try to protect vaccination from people that look at the science. Well, I do hope that people will try to get this book from their library. I'm not out to make money. I don't make any money out of this. But it's the Case Against Flouride. It's now nearly 5 years old, but it still has not, the opposition, the promoters of fluoridation have not produced a scientific response to this yet, which I find extraordinary. And the other thing is I would like them to look at this graph. If ever a picture was worth 1,000 words, what this graph represents is declining tooth decay in 12-year-olds in many countries, the data gathered by the World Health Organization. And what you see here is that tooth decay is declining as fast, if not faster, in non-fluoridated countries as the fluoridated ones. And I offered this at the end of in my summing up, my 5-minute summing up today, because I said, you said that you need both fluoridated toothpaste and fluoridated water to have the effect. Well, the lines here which represent non-fluoridated countries are only getting fluoridated toothpaste. They're not getting fluoridated water, and yet you don't see the difference that they claim. So what this picture represents then is tooth decay declining in 12-year-olds in many different countries. And on this graph, I think it's about 12 countries on here are non-fluoridated and 4 are fluoridated. And yet the rate of decline in tooth decay is as fast, if not faster, in the non-fluoridated countries, which really says your argument that you need both water fluoridation and fluoridated toothpaste just doesn't hold.